The biography of Thomas Gray, who is the writer of Elegy in a Country Churchyard. Thomas Gray was born on December 26, 1716, and he died on July 30th, 1771. He was an English poet and a son of Philip Gray and Dorothy Antrobus Gray. Thomas Gray was born into a prosperous but unhappy home. The home was unhappy as the father was mentally ill and very violent. So the mother separated from the father and ran a heart business of making women's hearts. Through the business, the mother was able to raise money to send Gray to Eton School and Peterhouse College. So another problem that the family faced was that Gray was the only surviving child of the parents. The mother gave birth to 12 children, and 11 of them died at infancy. Gray was the only one that survived into adulthood. So when Gray was at Eton School, he formed a quadruple alliance. He formed an alliance with 3 boys there. They had a group. So, and all of them in that group loved a very quiet life, and they liked poetry a lot. So his friends there were Richard West, who was the closest among them, then Horace Walpole, and Thomas Ashton. Okay, Gray did not graduate. He did not complete his education at Cambridge as he embarked on a tour to different parts of Europe with his friend Horace Walpole. Horace Walpole was the son of the first Prime Minister of England, Robert Walpole. Or later on, Gray earned a degree in law, even though he never practiced the profession. But his love for poetry made him gain a widespread acclaimed respect in England, to the extent that England offered him the post of a poet laureate, which would make him an official poet in England. But Gray rejected that honor because he cared less for fame and adulation. So Gray experienced a lot of death in life, as most of his friends, or almost all his friends, died painfully. They died a painful death. And Gray lost his closest friend, Richard West. And that friend, apart from his siblings, he lost his also closest friend called Richard West. And the death of Richard West affected him much, as people believe that it was the death of Richard West that inspired him to write this poem, Elegy written in a country churchyard. Then after that, then his friend Walpole nearly escaped death, which also affected Gray greatly, and that made him to start thinking about mortality, his own mortality. Later on, Gray relocated to a quiet village called Stoke Post in Buckinghamshire, England. Okay, so he died after a short illness on 30th July 1771 at Cambridge at the age of 54. So this is the historical context of Elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray. So this poem portrays the meditative philosophical tendencies and gentle melancholy that characterize the English poets of the Graveyard School of Poetry, which lasted between 1740s and 1750s. So Elegy in a Country Churchyard belongs to the Graveyard School of Poetry. And this was a poetic graveyard poetry was school of poetry was a poetic or philosophical movement that centered more on mortality and equality. So the poem dignified melancholy elegy that celebrate the graves of humble and unknown villagers, suggesting that lives of the rich and the poor alike lead poets to the grave. So the works of the Graveyard School were significant are the early precursors of the Romantic movement. Yes, this Graveyard School was or served as the early precursors of the Romantic movement, which came after the Enlightenment period. And people believe that the churchyard in this poem, the poem was set in a graveyard that belongs to a church in a rural area in a village. And people believe that the churchyard in this poem is that of Stoke Pogs, Buckinghamshire. When Gray relocated to Stoke Pogs, Buckinghamshire, okay, after losing many beloved ones, he relocated to a village called Stoke Pogs, Buckinghamshire. And that graveyard, people say that he visited that graveyard. The graveyard was located at St. Giles Church, Buckinghamshire, which Gray attended services there. Okay, so then even up to now, that was when Gray was buried, when he died, and his aunt was also buried there. His mother was also buried in that same graveyard. So it is believed that this graveyard inspired or formed the setting of this elegy. Then another important history behind this elegy written in a country churchyard is Gray's life. His life was surrounded by loss and death, and many people he knew died painfully and alone. In 1749, several events caused him serious stress. On 7th November, Mary Ann Trubus, who was his aunt, died, and her death really devastated Gray's family. So the loss of the aunt was compounded a few days later by the news of his childhood friend, Horace Wapo, who was almost killed by two highwaymen. Although Wapo survived this, but the side effects of this caused Gray to spend much of his time contemplating his own mortality, and he began to contemplate various aspects of mortality.